Jesse Öqvist was part of the small but mighty crew that helped define the unmistakable Orange County Drum and Percussion sound of the late 90s. From the humble beginnings in Daniel Jensen's garage to building kits that would end up on legendary stages and platinum-selling records, Jesse had a front row seat to a pivotal moment in drum history. This is the Fully Vented Podcast. Now here's your host, Jared Fallon.
What is your full name, where are you from, and what dates did you work at Orange County?
My name is Jesse Öqvist. I'm from Southern California, and I started working at O.C.D.P. in 1997 and worked there through till 1999, and then had a brief stint back when they did their Guitar Center run, like the very first time that they're doing the Guitar Center run. I think that was in 2000 and either 6 or 7, and I was there for about a month or so, kind of a little bit off and on. I was also working in freelance video production, and so when I wouldn't have a job to do in video, because it's kind of up and down, then I would go into O.C.D.P. and be part of that building line.
Awesome. How did you hear about O.C.D.P. and were you a drummer?
So yes, I was a drummer. I heard about O.C.D.P. Actually from Adrian Young. I was talking to him. We had kind of become friends a couple years earlier. So we met in '93, and then probably like '95, I'm like, hey, I need to get some new drums, and I'm not really digging the sounds of these, and I want to get something new. And so he suggested, hey, check out O.C.D.P. Man, they're making some great stuff. They all do custom drums, but my concern was on the price tag, and I was like, oh gosh, yeah, but it's probably going to cost me like $1,000 just for a snare drum. Ultimately, I was wrong. It would have cost me about $300 for just a good 14x6 10-ply snare drum, or I was playing more like soprano snares, so like a 12x7 or something like that, and which is what he was playing on as well at that time, which was his first drum from the company. So I just kind of left it at that, and I just didn't really pursue it. I think I bought like a Pearl snare drum or something, and it was like, I think it was a 12x7. And then I started seeing a few ads, and I knew that he was playing them as well too. And then obviously once Tragic Kingdom broke, then I saw that he was playing those drums. I saw a couple of ads. I think there was one for Taylor back when he was still with Alanis Morissette, ads in like Modern Drummer magazine. And then from there, I talked to this other guy who told me that Adrian had actually purchased part of the company. And so he helped get them out of some financial problems. So then I called up Adrian when he was like off the road and like maybe reach him. And I said, hey, I heard you bought the company. I'd be interested in working for you guys. Do you guys have any openings? And he said, no, I'm sorry, we don't. But then from there, I said, well, what if I volunteered my time? And I had a feeling that I probably wouldn't at that time be able to afford like a $3,000 or $4,000 drum set, but I'm like, but maybe I could build one. So, anyways, he contacted John and Daniel and said, hey, I got this guy who's interested in just kind of volunteering his time for a little while. So then he called me back and said, yeah, if you want to volunteer your time, we can't pay you anything right now, but if you work out well, then we could maybe see about doing that. So that was my introduction to the company, and then my, I guess, moving forward, so I could see if I could actually join it and be a part of it.
That's interesting. I think always, I don't know if many people who are fans of the brand know that Adrian was involved in the business side of it. You know, that he actually, had owner stake in the company. I didn't know it was that early on. I was under the assumption that he kind of came in before the Guitar Center stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was definitely well before the Guitar Center stuff. It was, I think it was in '97 is when he, like early '97 is when he came in, or maybe, yeah, it would have been like spring or summertime. It was just helping them get out of some financial issues that they had, and it really kept the ball rolling.
I mean, it's also just if you think about it too, like they were so not that Orange County wasn't on the map, but I don't think that, Travis hadn't, exploded with Blink or, like a
Right.
lot of
Yeah.
albums hadn't come out yet that kind of put
Hmm.
them on the map. So it's interesting that he believed in it so early on, you know what I mean, to put his money towards it.
Yeah. And the I think by that point they had been on the road for like 2 years or so, and with touring nonstop off of Tragic Kingdom. So when the when you do have that extra bit of money and you're like, well, what's really important to me? He really loved those drums and loved being part of that family. And so, yeah, he was willing to do what it took to help the company um, move forward and get past, the simple problem of not having enough money to get things taken care of. So he really put a lot of time and care into it, and made sure that they were doing good.
Did what were you doing before OCDP?
So I was playing drums in a local band, and but as far as work goes and school goes, I had just finished community college in it would have been the spring of '97, and I was working at an accounting firm. It was fine, but obviously, it's not the most exciting thing, and so. And I didn't really have any clear direction where I wanted to go after community college. And so at that point, it was just like, hey, there's this opportunity to kind of jump into this really cool, fun music company. It's a music instrument company, and just going, yeah, this could be something I could really grab onto. Obviously, sometimes you just have no idea what's gonna just pop up in front of you. And I didn't want to just kind of always wonder, like, oh, well, what if? Or, oh, they told me that there was no positions open. So, all right, well, I guess that chapter's closed and just move on. So that's why I pursued it. And I was working part-time. Actually, I went from my accounting firm from full-time to part-time, and then doing the other days over at O.C.D.P. And then after I think about 6 weeks of doing the kind of internship, volunteering my time, I think then they said, hey, you're doing a good job. We want to put you on. So then I started working there on Tuesdays and Thursdays paid, but I mean, it's still a $6 an hour pay. So um, it was essentially going, hey, I like this company. I enjoy this. It's really great. And so I'm going to um, just go for it, and the pay aspect doesn't matter, but of course you still have to have a living, so and pay your bills. So that's what happened. And then probably after about maybe 3 months or so of doing that with them, maybe a little bit less, then they asked me if I'd start coming in full time. So then I stopped working at the accounting firm and just did full time with OCDP.
Right on. So, I mean, you said it was kind of like an internship, and obviously you reached a level where they felt comfortable to have you come in full time. Did you have any woodworking experience prior to working at Orange County, or any drum building experience?
No, not really. I think I had pulled the wrap off, like that really cheap silver wrap off of like an old Ludwig composite snare drum or something like that, like one time, and but that was pretty much it. But actually, my time over at OCDP, and especially John, I became a lot more comfortable with working with wood and building things, and um, taking care of whatever issue, and kind of understanding like logistics, and then being able to apply kind of my new knowledge into jumping into other tasks. And so actually a few years after working at OCDP, actually like remodeled like the inside of my townhome, like did the kitchen stuff and did the full bathroom, and it was a lot of times the experience I'd gotten at OCDP had made me more confident in that, and then also just gave me some like real practical things about using things like jigsaws and just different types of power tools.
It's funny to think like, like you left Orange County, but Orange County never left you.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Yeah. Yeah, well, definitely the lessons that I learned there on so many different levels are have impacted my entire life. Absolutely.
so how would you describe the day to day? Like, walk me through when you were in the garage, pulling up. What would your day typically be like?
Well, you usually have one or two different projects that you were working on. I was like kind of like the main things that you wanted to get out next. And so usually get out there, I think either probably at 9 o'clock. And then and just kind of start on doing some sanding or whatever was needed wherever you left off the day before. And then when I was there, there was two other employees, a guy named Joe, and then also Mike Kelly. And so usually the three of us would kind of be there first. John would usually come in a little bit later with with supplies that he had picked up, and sometimes it was like drum orders that he had gotten back from the painters or picked up powder coating or whatever, and then since I was at Daniel's house, he would often come in, but he was also doing a lot of like drum tech work and kind of A&R stuff. So he'd be a lot of times out late. So then he would usually kind of roll up and come downstairs. I guess probably more like closer to like 12 o'clock or whatever. Like, and then we'd like have lunch or whatever. So.
You had just mentioned that John would bring in supplies, or how did you guys have, especially since you said that Adrian was kind of throwing money, like, is that where the money was coming from? Like, how were you guys able to actually, kind of operate? Like, how did that come about?
Well, that would, I mean, as far as like on Adrian's side, I believe he had put just a kind of a lump sum in to start for him to kind of like buy into the company. And then, but that was of course all handled by the accountants. And so then I know they would have discussions from time to time about maybe being short a little bit or something like that, kind of need a little bit of extra boost. But as far as we were concerned, we would just get, John would just bring in parts and we would take care of it, and just kind of move the drums to the next step so we can finally get them out and get them shipped.
So while there, what jobs did you typically do?
Well, I mean, it's everything from taking the raw parts that we'd have, the shells, and you cut them to the right size. You see the order, cut them the right size. You put the wrap on. You mark out the drum to put on all the hardware. You edge the drum. You do all the sanding to make it nice and smooth, and then put the drum set together, and then just ready for ship out. Or sometimes it was local guys who would come in and just pick up their drums. So for all different types of drums, it was for the um, sometimes people would just order a snare drum, obviously, and other times they'd order a full kit, and so you just get the whole thing ready, and then you have to pack it up. Also, when we were at that small of a size, you could answer the phone too, and we talked to prospective clients about um, the like the costs and the kind of the options too. Also, when we were there, we'd have people drop on by. Sometimes they'd call us up and say, "Hey, I'm interested in checking out what options you guys have. I'm local or I'm going to be in town," so they'd come on by too. So there'd be a little bit of hosting as well too, and then also you wouldn't know who would be dropping by at any given time. So there's plenty of times when uh, Taylor or Travis would drop by, or other local guys who would drop on by to either just kind of hang out a little bit. Sometimes they would be picking up things to for like future, like an upcoming recording, or then one of the funniest things with Travis when he was with the Aquabats is he sometimes just come in with like this, like a snare drum or a couple drums, and like, "Hey, do you guys have any extra like used heads that I can just have?" Because we would like look at the snare drum that he would bring in, right? And It would be so concave. We'd be like, dude, you could eat cereal out of this drum head. You've turned this into a bowl. This is amazing. But yeah, he was always real nice. And Taylor came by a couple times. He just lived in Laguna Beach, just down the street. So he'd kind of drop by and either want to hang out with Daniel for a little bit, or kind of look at some of the drums we had, or just kind of yeah, just kind of we all just kind of enjoyed being part of that family. You kind of didn't know what was going to happen on the day to day, which also made it kind of fun too.
So where would you guys actually like source your supplies? Like you think, drum companies, they're making stuff. Was like John just kind of going down into the local hardware store to get stuff, or was like did you guys have accounts set up at that point, or was it kind of just, grabbing what you needed for just the day?
Yeah, I think it was mostly that as far as just the hardware. Now, that wasn't going to be a lot of things. You're talking about sandpaper and, hex head bolts and washers. But of course, as far as like all of the actual drum hardware goes, those were different companies based out of um, a Taiwan. Maybe they have like a representative or so here in the US, but that was, of course, the majority of the purchases were with companies like World Max or other ones, Sunlight. A lot of that stuff was built out in Taiwan and then shipped out here, and then he would work with like the middleman to get their products sent to us.
What was the hierarchy like? Like who did you report to? Or was there like I'm assuming at this point there wasn't really like a shop manager or like a GM or anything like that, right?
I mean, John would be like the general manager, the daily operations kind of guy. But there really wasn't too much reporting because everything was just out there on the table. So it wasn't like we were doing things on a computer and then they had to kind of check in with us to see where we stood on something. You could just arrive at the shop and go, okay, I see that the hardware and um, that the wraps on this drum, the hardware is on this drum, and it needs to be edged and kind of moving forward. But there was never like a reporting like, okay, so here's the information about this project and this project and this project. We might get like a phone call from John saying, hey, I'm out here picking up this stuff. What do we need for this drum or for this kit or something like that? And we might say, hey, yeah, I think we're running a little bit low on lock washers, and we could use some uh, a few more M4 screws, like 12 millimeter length or something like that.
Okay. What was your relationship like with Daniel?
With Daniel, I mean, you could definitely tell there was like a big brother, little brother type of a thing, where he was the boss, he was in charge, and but he was always real kind, real sweet to me. Um, he definitely was very motivated by those things that he liked and the aspects that he wanted to be involved with, and so that's where he spent a lot of his time. So as far as like the day to day, I didn't get a lot of like say building time next to him, but he would kind of when he had a project that he was working on or so, he'd often come down and like kind of dial in those drums and then take them out. But then a lot of times then he would, he'd be gone kind of before the workday would be over, and he'd be heading up and then doing super important things, obviously, which is connecting with these musicians, which is what made the company relevant to begin with. So that was his main focus for sure.
What was your relationship like with John?
John definitely had a lot more hours together. He was a very kind man. He has three girls, and there's definitely an aspect of kind of girl dad about him. Um, he uh, he wanted to make sure that everyone like felt comfortable doing what they were doing, so he would kind of help them out. Um, but also, though, there was a little bit of a push pull because his his main thing was let's get these drums out, let's get these things moving, and And Daniel was a little bit more on the, "Hey, let's get this stuff absolutely perfect, perfect, perfect." Like you're sanding this edge, down to 220 or even 400 to make sure that it is the nicest, smoothest thing possible. And the joke was John would be like, "Yeah, we don't have to do that. We'll just fold a piece of sandpaper in a little pinch, and we'll just go around it real fast, and we'll just get this stuff out of here." So John was definitely more of the on the production side. Like we got to keep this stuff going because we won't get paid until we get these drums shipped, and we need to get this payment so that we can pick up the supplies for the next kid.
Yeah, I don't think people, again, fans of the brand or many people know that there is a relatively a big age gap between John and Daniel. So it's interesting to hear that John was more like the mentoring kind of role, made sure
Hmm.
you were like set up. Like I always wondered how that dynamic worked, like, you know what I mean,
Hmm.
being partners with somebody, with an age gap.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was probably about 15 years age difference, if not a little bit more. But John was definitely just like the father of the company, as far as not the owner of the company, but just definitely like the someone everyone would talk to, and you can kind of share your problems with him, and he would, give some good advice. He was a very friendly, jovial man as well too, and he really connected with a lot of people. I think pretty much everyone who came through the shop really felt kind of his fatherly figure, uh, and had an impact on their lives.
So John was the vice president and Daniel was the
Mhm.
president. Does that mean that Daniel was the one who initially, put the money towards getting this going, or, seeing how it was at
Yeah.
his house?
Yeah, they had met. They were both working at West Coast Drums, which was a primarily a retail shop, but they also had like a repair shop as well too. And West Coast Drums was a pretty big deal down in Orange County for a couple of decades. And they met each other in the fix it in the repair shop, and they hit it off. And Daniel had some money to invest, and they started, as far as I understand, they started kind of like dreaming, like, well, you know what, we could do this ourselves. We go like South Orange County instead of in like the where's that, Costa Mesa area, or like Fountain Valley, I think was where they first got started. And so then they're just like, yeah, you know what, we can do this. And then also as they were repairing a lot of drums, they were seeing how all these different drum companies made things. And then it started their wheels spinning, like, well, how can we make this a little bit better? How can we make this not so hokey? What kind of parameters could we set up so that we're not putting the lug like directly like over the seam, where half the lug is on the seam and half the lug is off the seam. Um, for wraps. And so it kind of was this, I guess maybe an incubator or so about how to really create like their product and how to make it better, more purposeful, more artistic. And then of course when you see all these different companies, your mind starts to kind of go like, well, what if we did this and that? And that was always for my time there, it was always like a big mover and motivator. Was like, okay, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. What if we tried this and did like a slight alternate? Um, and so then we'd even build our own drums that we would kind of pay for the supplies, and then but then create something that hadn't been created before. So
Good time to mention to any of our listeners out there. Head over to our Patreon. I'm actually going to have Jesse stick around afterwards, and he's going to tell us about some of those drums that he built while working there. And like I said, head over to our Patreon and subscribe if you want to hear more. But moving on, would you say that Daniel was the driving force, or like, you know what I mean, had the vision to be building drums and not just, working on others?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, Daniel definitely wanted to put his stamp on the drum industry, and so yeah, he would definitely be wanting to check out the stuff that we were doing to make sure that it was all top notch, and that there were not mess ups, and there was not like this, oh well, it's okay, like we'll just ship this out. It kind of got a little bit messed up or whatever. Everything had to be pretty much perfect or so. But we did have like a little, I think Mike told me this, Mike Kelly, he said like we make it sure it's everything's as perfect as possible, but we always seem to manage to put that little first scratch or that little kind of that little dent that you wouldn't see, but it was just, in the production side, you got all these things moving around. So usually there'd just be some little tiny thing. So then the joke was like, hey, we took care of that first dent for you, so you don't have to worry about doing that.
Well, I mean, it's also crazy to just sit there and think, the drums and like the quality of what was coming out of, something essentially being built out of a garage. Like, it's you don't like you said earlier, it's kind of like a typical woodworking garage, but like, when you think level of quality and attention to detail, it doesn't always
Mhm.
translate, I just always find that so cool that it was just a garage.
Yeah. I mean, and that just lends itself to the craftsmanship. There's lots of tailors who do amazing work, or shoe repairmen, or whatever, or watch fixers who do amazing things, and they're just in this tiny little, 10 by 10 cubicle when they're just working away. But it's, of course, it's the hands, and it's the attention to detail, and it's the care that really is what makes the product, uh,
Mhm.
as beautiful and as powerful as it is.
Yeah, and then you also sit there and think, Adrian has, these kits that, no doubt, and when they exploded, they're playing these, live shows on, back in the day when, when you used to see live performances on TV,
Hmm.
like
Yeah, yeah,
Letterman and stuff like that. You don't sit there
right.
and think that it's just, a few guys working on that, what I mean, or built that. Like, how many guys
Yeah, I
were,
mean,
sorry, I was gonna say, how many guys were there?
so when I got there, there was, as far as the builders, it was Mike and Joe, and Joe kind of gotten on the outskirts of the company a little bit, and so he was only there for maybe a few weeks, maybe 2 months or so, and then he was gone, and so it was just Mike and I building for a while, and then um, Damian Young, Adrian's younger brother, he joined the company and he started working there. And then so then it was the three of us, and then Mike had uh, some took a new job, and so he ended up not being there. This is probably like in '98 or so, and then um, and then John hired a old friend of his who he played in bands with for years, named Steve Muncie, and John and Steve were the same age, so they were like the old guys in the shop. But they were probably like 40 at that time, or whatever, 42 or something like that. But then it was just the three of us. And then when I finally ended up leaving, I guess it would have been like the summertime of '99. Then it was just, I think Damien had already kind of phased out. And I think it was just Steve, yeah, yeah. Steve and I, we were there for maybe about 6 months or so, just the two of us building, and uh, and then actually I wasn't phased out. They didn't have money to pay us that week, and they said, "Hey, we don't have any money to pay you guys, but it'd be really cool if you came, and started working next week." And but I had a wife and a mortgage to be paying, and so I was like, "I'm sorry, I got to find something else." So the dream was, I guess, deferred to going back to another time. But we always kept in good contact, and everything was and still close. There was no, like, hard feelings, or I didn't feel like I was abandoning them. They didn't feel like that either. It was just more of like a, hey, we understand. We all got to take care of ourselves. And then yeah, then still had a good connection with the shop as they kept on moving forward.
So you were, like you said, you left when it was just, it was still a smaller operation, only a handful of
Mhm.
guys. They weren't really making any
We
money.
had moved to the Santa Ana shop by that point, though, too. So we had
Okay.
gotten into a much bigger warehouse um, that we could really spread out. I think that would have been in '98 is when we switched out to there. maybe like spring of '98.
Okay, so did you see the shift at any point, or was it when you came back did you're like, oh wow, they've really, you know what I mean? They went there, you know what I mean?
Oh, as far as like just getting bigger and more like
Yeah,
proficient.
yeah.
Um, I think so. I mean, I had stayed in contact with them, so I would kind of know like when they get new hires. But yeah, they definitely went like in '99 when I was um when I was gone. I know they hired a few new guys who were, pretty invaluable parts of the company. I think in that time or like in the next 2 years, I know they hired like Jeremy and they hired Nick and they hired uh, Josh as well too. And I think Max got hired in that time frame. So, those guys were very vital to kind of moving forward and being able to produce more and more drums.
Um, so obviously after leaving, what was your relationship like with Adrian? You said you were friends prior to working there. Were you still close or kept in contact?
I mean, I would never say that we were like, super, super close, super best friends. But yeah, when I'd call him, you know, we would chat, and everything was, very, very cordial for sure. And I even saw him a few years back when he came through Dallas, and we just kind of talked about a bunch of stuff. We had actually lived about a mile from each other, and when I first met him after a No Doubt show, I knew that he lived close. And the funny thing was, we actually had, before I ever knew about No Doubt, we'd actually played basketball together at this park that was like in between our houses, like several times, and we knew all these same people. So it just became like, oh, okay, great. No, it's got a basketball friend and a drummer friend, kind of all rolled into one. And I remember one time there's this guy. Uh, who he was a friend of both of ours, and we were playing basketball, and then so then this guy said, Adrian, Jesse will school you on the court, and then but you can teach him a few things on drums. So
It's funny to me trying to picture Adrian Young with like a colored mohawk sitting there dribbling a basketball, you know what I mean, or attempting to make a dunk. I don't know why.
yeah, yeah, he was a good basketball player. Also at my church, we had an indoor gym, and I know he came out a few times as well too. We would play like on Sunday afternoons or on like Wednesday nights, whatever. And I know he came by a few times. Maybe a bunch of guys from like Long Beach, and it was some good action. So it's a way for everyone to stay fit and have a good time. So.
So obviously, like tons of memories that from your time there. Can you like narrow down to some of your what would be like the coolest memories you have?
Coolest memories. I mean, kind of the one that was a little bit surreal was People Magazine had run a picture of um, Taylor Hawkins with Minnie Driver, and John had like saw it like in the grocery store or whatever. And so then, like a day or two later, we're at the shop, and then Taylor comes walking in, and Minnie Driver's right behind him, and I guess Taylor needed to talk to Daniel about a few things, and then Minnie was just like in the garage. We were talking about like the shop dog, this big old bull mastiff that was Daniel's called Vanity, and we were talking about dogs and just kind of these random things. And then a couple minutes later, he said, "All right, we got to go," and so they just kind of left. It's like, okay, that was a little interesting. And but she was real sweet and just she seemed like a very genuine and sincere person. And then like other things that I mean, the very first day I got there, I'm working as just doing kind of like an intern, a free work from me. I get to the shop, and in the center table there's like 15 drum shells that have all been cut down to size. And they said, all right, so here's your first job. You need to sand every one of these drums. This is going to be Chad Sexton's yellow kit. And I'm like, oh, what? I'm a huge fan of 311. I've seen them play a couple of times. And so they go, and so you're going to use a sander for these big drums. Or these smaller ones, you have to go by hand. And there were some octobans some 6 inch and some 8 inch, and then I think an 8 inch tom, 10, 12, 13, 17, whatever. Probably not 17, but 16, 18, 20 gong tom, and then the bass drum and like a snare or two. And so I'm just there. I'm just using the hand sander on the bigger ones, and you go from 100 down to, I think it was 220, and then you go down to 400, and then even 600. Oh yeah, and I had to sand the inside and the outside. So that was like a full day project. You have to make sure you're not getting those little curlies that like an extra large piece of sand will actually cut into it, like right when you're starting off the paper. So you're going real soft to start, and you're making sure, and you're checking things out, and you're getting this wood, which is already a high quality maple plywood. You're getting this down to 600 grit, and you can almost see your reflection in this wood. And but it was an all-day project. I think maybe I'd finished it, or maybe I hadn't. But then these octobons, you've got, it's like this long, so you're just hand sanding with 100, and then you turn it and do it again, and you go again and again, and it probably took all 8 hours. And at the end of
Wow.
the day, they said, well, it was great to meet you. Have a good life. And I'm like, I'm coming back on Thursday. Like, oh, we figured you were going to quit for sure. Once you had to do all that manual labor, we thought you were gone. Absolutely. And there were a lot of guys who would come into the shop and, like, hey, this guy, or, somebody local who wants to come in. And I even had this with my own drum company too. You go, okay, cool, let's make some great drums. Here's your project. And then after like an hour, they're like, this is not what I signed up for. I'm out of here. And it's like, you have to put in the time and the effort and the elbow grease and all those types of things to get to where you can make some amazing, beautiful things that you're super proud of. But everyone needs to not only just start by doing these simple things, but continue to do them the entire time you're building drums, because they are very important to creating what you're wanting to do to the end product. But it's not glamorous, it's not fun. Your wrists will hurt if you do it too much. I'm sure you get carpal tunnel syndrome, but it is definitely the nature of the beast.
It's almost like sanding was the rite of passage, or you had to
Yeah.
or just you passed the test in a way, like you're at that bottom of the
Yeah,
totem pole.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. And just having that humility of, like, no, you're not going to be drilling holes into the side of this, brand new drum, just so you can mount the hardware and put the whole thing together. Like, you got to start from the beginning and really put in the time and effort so you can understand how it all comes together.
Did you feel that there was more pressure because it was Chad's kit, or like, um, the fact that it's like an artist kit? What was that? Was there an added, pressure onto that?
Um, N Not really, because we wanted to make sure that everything was perfect, or as perfect as possible. And so, um, it could be anyone's drum, and you just knew that you make sure that everything is done properly. um I'm sure Daniel looked through. I mean, I know that that first day that I was there, he looked through the stuff, a few times, and kind of feel around and go, hey, make sure you're hitting this spot a little bit better, so maybe the wood's a little bit rougher here, so we want to make sure we really get those parts down so it's nice and smooth. And he was definitely, like, say, quality control. And then also, Mike took that as well too, and was very much quality control, making sure that everything was as perfect as it could be. um and I kind of saw that the the two sides of John's side, like, let's get this stuff out as soon as possible, and then of course Daniel and Mike's side of making sure that this is absolutely, absolutely perfect, because you want them to be, you want it to be perfect. You don't want something to come back to you and you go, oh, I just figured you were going to miss this, or you get a new drum or something, or a new instrument, and you realize that there's this whole part that's like messed up that they just shipped out. So with my company, I've done the same thing too, where it's like the very last moment something happens. Like one time I was drilling a hole for the badge, and the drill bit broke, and so then it just did a little scrape on the finish, like right where the badge was going to be, and I'm like, I can't send this out. I gotta pull everything off. I gotta take the wrap off. I have to, when some other company might be like, well, let's just put a little bit of black highlight, like black Sharpie or something like that in that area, just to kind of so it's not as visible. Because when you are just worrying about the number of products that are getting out there, then you have to take shortcuts or kind of ignore some of those missteps. But when you're just think this drum is the most important drum in the world right now to me, and I make sure it's perfect and it's going to go out perfect, then you do have that sense of accomplishment. Yeah, I've gotten this out there. And then you also don't have the person who calls back up and says, hey, bro, what's up? This is all messed up here and this is bad or whatever. And then if there was something like that, it would have been something that would have maybe been the hardware parts that we had purchased, maybe like 6 months later, like one of the lugs broken or something like that. And a lot of times that would be just from somebody cranking it up so tight. That would be the actual issue. But to making sure that we ourselves were not the problem, but that we were there to make sure that everyone's drum was as nice as if it was built for Chad Sexton.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think that just not so much the sound, but also just the quality, especially during that time of
Mhm.
what you guys were doing, definitely made all the big guys. I feel like they kind of got complacent or just were, this is what you
Sure,
get. I feel like it definitely
sure.
made everybody else step their game up, you know, like start
Yeah,
taking things more seriously.
yeah. And that's, it's like any industry, now we're learning about is now we're seeing it as far as like tech and AI and stuff like that. When someone kind of you can even be like a small startup or something like that, but someone kind of raises the bar, then everyone else has to see where do I stand in this and how can we get even better. And so it's kind of like this back and forth. So but I guess with O.C.D.P, we never really had like a back and forth with another company as far as when I was working there, because there just was not a lot of options for what we were doing. It was kind of before us. Pork Pie was doing some of this kind of customized stuff and being a little bit more out there as far as like colors and wraps and all. And then we kind of took up to the next level. But then, of course, after we had a lot of, I guess, visual success with the number of artists who we had and and just how creative the drums were, then of course it spawned a whole nother generation of new builders wanting to recreate that and then put their little become their own piece of the bigger music industry puzzle.
So besides the flashy finishes that we kind of just talked about, and you're saying Bill was doing stuff over at Pork Pie. Obviously Orange County had also a flair to it. But one thing that always noticed to me was like the sizes. Who is it that really started to manipulate what traditional sizes would have been? Was that an artist that came in with that, or was that what you guys were just experimenting with?
I I think it was I think it was probably Daniel at first being like, well, you know what, if you can get a 22 by 16 bass drum to sound good, what if we had a 22 by 18? And I think there's maybe a few 18s that are out there. But then it's like, hey, well, what's a 20 length going to sound like? And what's a 20 by 20 length going to sound like? He also had pretty early on, I think it was when they were still at the drum shop. I think he had made like a 36-inch bass drum that was like as long as possible too, that they actually had in the drum shop when they were also a retail store as well too, and they had that on the floor, and guys would try to kick into that, and it's such a different feel, not hitting the head in the center, but like hitting it like in the lower part of the. I had seen that bass drum. I think they had it at the. I think he had it at his house, but I never played on that one. But it was like this big purple kit, and then I think they had all the hardware powder coated black, and it was like a shiny purple, and it was pretty cool. But yeah, it was just always like, well, how can we do things different? How can we make things sound better? And then of course it also went. Um, shortly, or I guess like this Adrian's second kit, he had like compact toms, and people were like, oh, that's going to sound so like, whatever, like flimsy and going to sound like just tiny. But they had some great sounds on those as well too. Going 4 inches, 5 inches deep on a 10 and a 12-inch rack tom, they still sounded great. And of course, that comes a lot from the edge too, is making sure that you have a really perfect edge on the top and the bottom, which is what you get that real true drum tone to. So then you can just kind of tune it whatever direction you want it to go.
Yeah, totally. I like I said, it's just the quality. I don't think a lot of that, is just kind of, well, this is the edge, just deal with it kind of thing. Where Orange County, I felt
Hmm.
like they really, if you put their edge
Yeah.
on anything, it will sound great.
Yeah. And then also even just sanding the inside. A lot of companies wouldn't want to spend the time to sand the inside of the drum. And is it going to affect the sound or anything that when you're not looking directly on the inside or feeling the inside, it won't affect any of that stuff. But just knowing that this is as smooth as possible, knowing that if there does get some condensation in there, it's got a lacquer acrylic over the whole thing, and then that's been sanded down too. So it's just going to look really well put together from every aspect of the drum. Like there was like we didn't have like don't look at this parts. Like I know sometimes like edges or whatever, especially the older drums would have like, just messed up parts that they could cover up with the drums. And we wanted to make sure that we never had those issues. Like the drum could be with everything, or it could be completely naked, and you wouldn't look at it and go, "Ooh, I just noticed something." There was an emphasis to make sure that never happened.
So with all the talk of, the attention to detail and the efforts that have been, put into place to, really make these drums shine, do you think that they were priced accordingly?
As far as price goes, um, I feel that they definitely needed to not price themselves into or out of the market, but to really focus on what is the price that we need to sell these drums to make a profit. And I think that was probably the biggest downfall of the company, is they were a little bit more concerned with kind of maximizing the number of sales versus, is this going to make us a profit, and is are we going to be able to be sustainable if we sell the drum for this price, or what's the price we need to sell this drum when you add up every aspect from, of course, the parts, the labor, the taxes, the rent, the whole aspect. I think if they would have spent more time worrying about that instead of just saying, well, DW charges this much for this comparable snare drum, or they charge this much for this comparable kit, then we need to kind of stay within that price range. And ultimately, I think that was the biggest misunderstanding, is that you can't just say, well, we'll charge a bunch of money if this drum comes, and I'm sure it'll end up working out in the wash, because there was a lot of variable factors in the actual final costs of the drums, and I don't think those were addressed properly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going, you looking on the website back in the day of how you would go about ordering, and I always remember
Mhm.
it was something along the lines of you put down a 50% deposit to get your kit started, and then you would pay the
Mhm.
remainder of the balance once the kit was complete.
Mhm.
So I felt like that just kind of might have added to the, you know what I mean, the not a good business practice. It felt like the, rob Peter to pay Paul kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely could be. I mean, those parts are expensive, so and then the amount of time and labor. So you obviously have to have a good amount. Of course, a hard thing too is when because of course, especially with the company, with the bands that we had, it was our biggest fans, the people that are buying the most drums, were teenagers and new, young 20-year-olds, and they were like the primary people that we were connecting with. And they don't have a ton of money unless their parents do have a ton of money. So so then they would, order something, but then because it's all customized and there's a list and there's not a super long, there's not a lot of employees working on these drums, it would take a long time for these drums to get finished. So then there was definitely, people to be like, yeah, I can't wait to get this stuff going, and we're gonna have it like in 2 weeks or in a month, and it's like, no, it's gonna be like 3 months at the soonest. And so they go, ah, well, I don't want to do that. Okay, never mind. And they would just, go to Guitar Center or whatever and pick up like a DW kit that was kind of comparable. Not They were kind of settling for that because that wasn't what they wanted. And but then we kind of lose a sale because we didn't have anything that was like already made for them. So I know there was some of those situations where kind of affected us financially, and also kind of discouraged the other people. But of course, then having we get half the money after, at the end, is definitely motivating to, okay, this is a $6,000 kit. We get $3,000 once we get this all finished. But my biggest concern was to get to that $6,000. It wasn't always done in a way that we knew all of the outlying costs of those drums. So sometimes the painter would come back and it would be a higher amount than we were expecting for the paint job to be finished, or the powder coating. So then that of course just comes out of the profit. And then if you give somebody a discount on top of that, and then all these things add up, it can really snowball.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's also like you just mentioned the painter. You can't really somebody puts a deposit or agrees to a price on a kit. You really can't therefore go and ask for more money for it. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, you can't go to somebody and say, "Hey, we were thinking it was going to cost $700, but it ended up costing $1,100." Unless when you actually do that, and this is what I've done with my company, is I've said, "Okay, I am estimating that your powder coating is going to come to $550. If it does come back at a higher amount, I will have the documentation that's saying that, and then the only charge will be just to make up the difference. So maybe it came in at 750 because of whatever, who knows, whatever reason. And then they go, okay, I thank you. I understand that. Okay, so here's the extra, whatever the amount would be, $150 or something like that.
Were a lot of those things outsourced? Like you mentioned powder coating, painting. Well, what was
Powder coat,
outsourced?
Powder coating and painting were both outsourced. Um, I don't think anything else was. We would buy the shells, and those would be a set price, and then the hardware would be occasionally, of course, the prices would go up. Um, so then, of course, you have to kind of take that into account, but you can't do that like, on a kit that says, "Oh yeah, by the way, the lugs went up 50 cents each, so we're gonna have to charge you an extra dollar each per lug," type of a thing. So you just kind of have to eat that cost, but that wouldn't be a drastic change. It was mostly the the painters, when they would come back with like someone wanted like like a 2 or 3 layer, maybe like um a glossy sparkle with a couple different colors like together or whatever. That's where it would come in pretty come in pretty high. And then John would just kind of estimate it initially, I think partly because he just wanted to make sure we would keep that sale. So instead of going, "Oh well, I'll tell you in 5 days once the painter gets back to me what the cost of the paint's going to be, so we can finish off your price," he would just kind of throw a price out there that he thought was going to be a combination of meeting the financial needs, but also not trying to scare off the kid. Because if you're like, "Yeah, it's going to cost you $7,000," they might go, "Wait, what?" But it's going to cost you $5,000, then okay. So there was definitely kind of a push and pull of what's the best way to kind of maximize the number of purchases, but um, but then sometimes you get bitten on the other side when you're not exactly sure what the expenses are going to be.
Yeah, totally. It also felt like everything was like I wouldn't say winging it, but it was flying by the seat of your pants. I don't think that they weren't forward thinking in the sense that, hey, we need to set this up or set that up. Like I always felt like that even with how the drums came out, meaning like just get the drum out to where it needed to go and there was no pictures of it. That's why, somebody will reference something. I'm like, I've never seen that.
Hmm.
Just kind of going with the flow, it felt like.
Yeah, I mean, back when we were building in the 90s, you never really thought too much about taking pictures of stuff because we didn't have them on our phones, and it wasn't just something that was just like, oh, let's just get a snapshot of that. I think probably social media has made us a lot more alerted to that. And looking back, or even with my company, I take pictures of pretty much everything that goes out, and you post it online, and you kind of gain some more traction from that. Also, too, because OCDP had started before social media was even a concept. Um, it was expensive to advertise. You had to put an ad in like Modern Drummer magazine or Drum magazine, and a lot of times it correlated um, with like one of your drummers being featured as a interview. And so then they would have like the, hey, meet Adrian Young, drummer for No Doubt. And then like next to his like cover picture would be like this half-page ad of Adrian Young plays Orange County Drum Percussion. Here's his sizes, and here's a little bit of information about him. There's, you can still find those on the internet as well too. But those ads cost like $5,000, $6,000. So how many $5,000 drum kits do you need to sell to be able to pay for that advertisement? And because we were at such a low volume, you can see how it just kind of. So then Adrian would be like, "Okay, you guys need an extra $1,000 to pay for lugs and hardware. Okay, we'll just put that in." So that's kind of where some of uh, that gradual um, extra investment happened because he wanted to make sure that things were still going good. So
Uh, how many kits, we saying you had to sell X amount of kits in order to be able to afford this, like, to afford the luxury of advertising and all that. What was like the frequency? Like, how many kits were you guys turning over, or snares were you guys turning over in like a month at that time?
probably at that time in like the late 90s, it would probably be like 5 kits and maybe like 15 snare drums between like two or three of us, like in a month. So yeah, it's because you're spending so much time on each one, and there was no like mass production at that time. So you are really putting a lot of time and energy into each one. And yeah, and obviously that's where then like getting a real understanding on the pricing is just going to be so important.
Yeah, and you said in the very beginning of this that you came back for the Guitar Center, run, the first run of snares.
Mhm.
How did you feel about that? Now it was like they started getting into the production side of it and doing more mass producing instead of, the real custom one-off orders. What was your take on that?
I had actually suggested doing that when I was working there. And I'd even kind of did a proposal saying, I'll just focus on building snare drums, and we'll make the same one. I actually met with a couple guys who were at Sam Ash, and just it was informal talks, but they were like, "Yeah, send us your price, and we can do that." And I even told the shop like, I'll pay for all the parts myself, and we'll just do like a profit sharing on these snares. And I felt like you probably get about um, two or three done each day. And so like one person putting out, say 12, 15 snare drums each week could be a good financial boost to them when they can hire more people to do their side. And then I think it would also have been a financial boost to me as well too. But I was told that they weren't interested in doing that and pursuing it. So I just left it at that. I thought it was good for them to branch out and to start doing some mass producing, because there were a lot of people that had found their drums elsewhere, I guess you'd say, because of the time frame it would take. So I thought that was really good. I was a little concerned though, because when I was talking to them and finding out what they were receiving for it and what their expenses were for it, there was not a lot of leeway. There was almost, it was very tough to make a profit, like a legitimate profit. And then if anything goes wrong, then it's going to go south. And of course, ultimately, that is what happened.
Interesting. So from an outsider's perspective, you're seeing these snares roll out at Guitar Center. In your mind, you're immediately going to think, oh wow, now they must be really, really crushing it if they're in Guitar Center, right? You would think that the business would
Yeah,
be thriving.
and they were still very good drums. The problem was just the price point of what they were receiving for those drums and how much it cost. How much and it's not just like parts. It's so many aspects of the government taxes, the payroll tax that you're paying, the the rent, how much uh, time each person is spending. All those companies that are successful, they have all those things mapped out. It's like this should take exactly this amount of time. Sometimes it'll take a little bit more, sometimes it'll take a little bit less, but this is going to be the average. And it really it's boring. I mean, the thing about our drum company was it wasn't boring. It was a lot of fun. We had amazing bands. We would when we'd have things like Almost Acoustic Christmas, which was a K rock 2 night concert. We'd have like 6 bands or 8 bands who would be playing at that, who would all be playing O.C.D.P. They would drop by the shop and be like, "Yeah, this thing broke here. Can you fix this up, or can you just retune this?" Or doing all that. And so it was enjoyable. It was exciting, and numbers and accounting and cost to profit ratios is not fun. It's not exciting. It's boring. And there was definitely a pushback of, well, we don't want to spend our time doing that. We just want to make drums and get these things out.
Yeah, totally. So we're kind of ending we're coming to the end here, and I'm just going to ask you a few more questions. So I know you said you had left Orange County the first time because of, not being able to really make a living out of it. The second time, why did you leave?
They were hiring some more people to do the assembly line, and because I wasn't full time, I was kind of like the first one to be let go of in that regard.
Gotcha. And what was your thoughts when they officially closed the custom shop? What was your reaction?
You're definitely sad about that. There's so many great drums came out of there, and and then of course you just care about the people too. Care about John and Steve and Daniel. Uh, Daniel was doing fine though, because he had already jumped on had been with Travis for several years. So that was his, main focus. So as far as like having a career goes, kind of change or pivot, whatever, it wasn't that big for him. He just didn't have a shop that he would drop in at and like, for picking up more drums and stuff. But I mean, the the part that I guess was the saddest was that both Steve and John were, they were out of a job, and they had spent so much time and energy there that went by the wayside. And then you also know that, you start seeing the stuff that came out of Guitar Center with them building it in the same factory that they were building was it LPS?
I think it was
Um,
SPL.
SPL, yeah. Um, and and you just go, okay, well, it's going to sound all right, but it's not going to sound great. So there's kind of a place that you miss with that too, knowing that a good friend or kind of a legendary creative company is no longer able to do the thing that they're best at, which is make amazing sounding drums.
Yeah, I mean, I could see definitely. Sad to think that, like, everyone else kinda, like, had a tech gig or some other things lined up, and, it just felt like, you said Steve and John, that was kinda all they really knew.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So it makes it tough.
Yeah. So, gonna leave you with this last question here, Jesse.
Okay.
Did you understand at the time that you were part of what was going to become, a legacy in the drum world?
I felt so. I mean, we were making drums for albums that were, going quadruple platinum. And we were creating stuff that was changing the game. So that's definitely why, all of us really kept on going. I think Mike Kelly told me like early on, like, I can make more money working at McDonald's, but these drums are pretty awesome. So, and you're kind of you knew you were doing something that was going to be a lasting legacy because those drums will just last forever. Like you hear about someone talking about this, whatever, like 1942 Gretsch kit or something like that. So, drums in general are gonna last. And then knowing that we are thanked on probably like 70 million albums sold when you add up all those bands and all of the in the thanks, usually say something uh like the drummer would just list like thanks to Daniel, John, and O.C.D.P or something like that. So yeah, it was definitely cool, and it was definitely a reason why you're just like, I just want to keep on going with this, even if it was a little bit stressful because of the on the financial side, both on the finances for the company and then also your own personal finances too. You're just like, I gotta stretch this money as far as possible. And but you make sacrifices for things that you really care about and that you love. So I definitely saw that.
Yeah, and, I guess you never really think about it that you just mentioned the records being sold. The number of records and that sound is captured on those. Obviously
Hmm.
the company's not here in the forefront anymore, but definitely the sound is gonna resonate for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, as long as people are streaming those things, that snare sound comes through hard and heavy.
Yeah, totally. Well, Jesse, man, thank you so much for taking the time out here to sit and
Absolutely.
take a trip down memory lane. Like
Yeah,
you
it's
said, you're gonna
fun.
stick around, and for our listeners out there, he's gonna jump on our Patreon, and we're gonna pick his brain some more. But why
Okay.
don't you tell people where they can find you?
Okay, so I did start my own drum company about, I guess, 7 years ago or so, called Öqvist Drums, and that is O with an umlaut, QVIST DRUMS. And but you can also find me on Instagram and on Facebook. And then we also have a website that we're putting together now, and we'll have a full like calculator and everything like that. So it's easier to get priced out on drums. Um, and then just Jesse Öqvist in on Facebook. There's two people that in the entire world that have that name, and that guy is my third cousin. So there's two Jesse Öqvists out there. Um, and then of course I'm also on Instagram, both company and then personal as well too. So
Awesome. Well, Jesse, again, thank you, man. It's been real, and for everybody, stay tuned. We have way more to dive into. And again, Jesse, you're the man. Talk to you later.
my pleasure. Had a great time. Thanks, Jared.
That's our time with Jesse Öqvist, a first-hand witness to the garage-born beginnings of Orange County Drum Percussion. From sanding Chad Sexton's yellow kit one day to seeing O.C.D.P.'s sound ripple across platinum records, Jesse's stories remind us of how a small crew left a huge mark on drum history. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't miss the bonus segments with Jesse available now on our Patreon, where you'll also find ad-free episodes and more behind-the-scene content. Thanks for listening to the Fully Vented podcast. We'll catch you next time.